authenticity is paramount. People need to see you walking what you talk. The audio has to match the video. Have you ever watched something and it's not in sync? It drives you crazy, right? So I hope really that what my family sees, Lisa at home, what our colleagues see and our clients see, I'm the same person.
Welcome to Encouraging Leaders, a podcast that exists to remind CEOs and aspiring CEOs that you do not have to lead alone. I'm Mark T. Braun, and today I'm joined by a special friend and guest and a leader here in the St. Louis community and around the world, Lisa Nichols. Lisa is the CEO and owner of Technology Partners. They are known for their culture of consultants, their internal culture, and the incredible work that they do for their clients around the world. She also has a podcast of her own, Something Special, which is such a beautiful gift. She actually highlights the beauty of her daughter's work through living a life with Down syndrome and how that can be turned into so much of a gift as a something special. So welcome, Lisa, to the show.
I'm glad to be here, Mark. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I remember that I got to actually be on your podcast. It was so fun. And I was like, I really want to do that someday. And so you have been an encouragement to me and so many other leaders. But this is actually an encouragement from that output. You were doing it. You were out there. You were sharing. And so thank you for that encouragement to do this kind of work.
I remember that podcast with you, and it was so much fun. You and John Kramer came on together, and we had a great time. And I know you've got so much wisdom to share as well, Mark. So I appreciate you inviting me on to yours.
Well, I've been asking the same question to start us off because we're trying to encourage CEOs that they don't have to lead alone. When in your leadership journey did you realize that? When did you come to the realization that you didn't have to try everything by yourself? You could actually ask for help.
That is a very good question. Well, I'm very fortunate because I co-founded the Technology Partners with my husband, Greg. So we've been partners in the business. And so I have known all along from the get-go that I could not do this on my own. And so he comes again. We started our careers in corporate America. We were there for 10 years and then started Technology Partners, and we're very gifted differently. So there is no way that I could do what I do without the amazing team that we have built. And so I always say, and I know you've heard this adage, but if you think that you're the smartest person in the room, you're clearly in the wrong room. And so I know that I am not, and I know what my strengths are, and I know how I need to surround myself with people that can fill in those gaps.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you were partnered in your marriage. How many years have you been married? Are you getting ready to celebrate a milestone is what I heard?
40 years.
Yes, that is so
years.
Awesome.
We were 12.
and you've been in this business together for 30 years.
30
is that
years.
Right?
Yeah, we just celebrated 30 years on May 4th.
Well, I think about, you actually went into partnership with your husband. And so in marriage, we know, normally most of us learn early on that we can't do marriage alone. Business, though, we go into the business and a lot of times we're separated from our marriage partner and going out and charging and, we're living two different lives. So you had a unique gift there and being able to be a partner in both. What has been one of the secrets to be able to have both a marriage partnership and a business partnership? That's complex.
It is complex. That's an excellent question. I get asked that question a lot because a lot of people say there's no way I could do that. Yeah, I could not work with my spouse. Like I said, Greg and I are gifted very differently, but we're also a little bit of the same temperament in that we're both a little type A. So I will tell you, we did not always do this perfectly, Mark. And there were times where we were stepping on each other's toes. But we learned that we are gifted differently, and there's a swim lane that I swim in and a swim lane that he swims in. I will tell you what is really something that we had to learn, though, is when you own your own business, for people out there that are business owners, it truly can be all-consuming. You think about it, it's hard to turn it off, right? So we were both in the business, and so it was hard to turn it off. And so we would be on vacation and we're talking strategy. We'd be walking in the park, we're talking strategy. And we came to this conclusion that we needed to treat one another in business just like we would a colleague. And we said, we're going to start setting up time. We're going to set aside time to meet with one another just like we would our colleagues, right? During the business hours, instead of bringing that home. And I'm not telling you that we do that perfectly. There's still Saturdays where we'll sit for 4 hours and strategize, but it's not, we're much better at it, now where we say, okay, that's work. Now let's turn that off and here's family. And I heard it recently said, you want to be present where your feet are. And it's hard to do, though, when you own your own business because the buck stops with you. We have 450 families that are counting on us, right, Mark? So it's easy to get caught up in that. But I think that's one of the secrets for us is that we've really put boundaries around that.
Yeah, I hear there are a couple things that I hear. Role clarity. It's actually something that we have to do well as CEOs. We have to clarify roles. And when roles aren't clear, decision structures aren't clear, and who makes what decisions and who's in what swim lane isn't clear. And so you have to do it at a high level whenever you're having relationships that have relationships outside and inside. Many of our clients are family businesses. So whether it's father, son, sisters, brothers, whatever it is, those dual relationships require significant skill in relationship role clarity. And then the second thing you mentioned is healthy boundaries. And how do you set them with people inside your business and inside of your partnerships, wherever they're at? Those are two great takeaways for me, though, on your share.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you think about back even earlier, it might be inside of that time in the last 30 years, who's been from the outside an encouraging leader for you? Who's been a mentor, a guide, a coach, somebody that's actually poured into you and shared encouragement for you?
Well, I'm going to answer that in a couple of ways. Greg and I have been very blessed and fortunate to be a part of CEO Forum. And CEO Forum is a organization of about 300 leaders. And Greg and I have we're very, what I want to say, I'm just going to come out and say it, we're Christians. So we follow a higher power in how we live our life and how we conduct business. But this forum, this organization that we're part of, all of these CEOs and leaders in this organization are of that same faith and are of that same philosophy, right? So there have been so many of those people that have poured into me as well as Greg over the years. But I would say both from a leadership as well as a spiritual component, Dr. Richard Blackaby, I sat under his teaching for 3 years in what's called the Spiritual Leadership Institute, which is a flagship for CEO Forum. And it was just a very transformative time. And I just texted him yesterday about something. And what Richard has done, obviously he's written a lot of books and he led a seminary. He's done a lot of different things, but he is a coach for CEOs that have that philosophy, and faith is important to them. And how do you lead with your faith forward in the marketplace?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it into this conversation. I think about how many places that is, quote, off limits, the idea that we can't talk about our faith backgrounds, our traditions that give us and lift us up and give us purpose in life. And so I've really been so encouraged by your example of being able to say, hey, listen, here is what I rely on for my purpose in life. And so thank you for bringing it in. I want to ask you actually a question directly about that, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
Because there's no rules on podcasts, we get to do this. Somehow you've been able to do it when I watch it that is not exclusionary, that is not telling people they're wrong while you say how you are living your life. And I think that's really such a beautiful example of leadership. What do you think is the secret there for building an inclusive, diverse culture, serving diverse clients, while you have your faith practices that you rely on deeply?
That's really an excellent question. The first thing that I would say, Mark, is I know I am not the judge. I'm not the judge. God is the judge, ultimate judge, in the way that I believe. And so when I'm interacting with people, I'm living my life according to how I believe He's called me to live. And my blueprint for that is the Bible. And I study the Word of God, how I am to live. I pray. But when I'm interacting with other people, I'm not asking them to be like me. But I hope by my example that they see that even in the face of challenge, that I have joy. Even in the face of conflict, I can still be compassionate and empathic. During those times, I'm going to be answering for me. I'm not answering for Mark. I'm not answering for anyone else. That's why I am not exclusionary.
I know that.
Really.
I can tell.
Yeah, I'm really not. It's like, this is the way I believe, but that doesn't mean that's the way you believe. But maybe you will see something in how I lead that you think, hey, I like that. And then we can talk about it at that point. And I'm really fortunate because I have been able to have some of those conversations, but I never push it.
I think about the leaders that I have admired in the world, around the world, that have done great things. I think back on Martin Luther King, and as he's out there courageously leading for a cause that's a purpose that's way beyond him, his faith practices gave him so much strength and encouragement along the path. When we strip that out and we say, what did he do? We can lose some of the how. Like, what am I supposed to do as a leader to learn and grow? And so I love that you're willing to share it and just to talk about the complexity, because we don't want to exclude. And I can tell that's what you don't want to do. You're building a growth organization, and you want them to feel the impact, and you want them to see the joy in your life and the peace that your faith brings you through uncertainty and challenge, which is a skill, a leadership skill. And so how did you build that skill? I think about, some of the practices. Give me the practices that allow you, instead of the beliefs, give me the practices that allow you to come in and lead calmly and peacefully while there's trials and challenges and work, life happens. What are the key practices that you would recommend developing?
There is a difference between reacting and responding. That's what I would say. Now, for me, Mark, I have to start my day being centered on the right mindset. Mindset is a lot, right? And so I believe that when I get centered, I believe that I respond better. But like a practice would be, maybe you are walking into a really difficult conversation. I am not just haphazardly walking into that. I'm prayerfully considering the way that I show up. I'm prayerfully considering the words that I will use, and leading with compassion and understanding that sometimes really those tough situations come down to maybe a lack of communication, maybe a misunderstanding of communication, and really trying to understand the human on the other side of that. So that would be one thing. There are times, listen, and I promise you, I do not do this perfectly. There was a situation a couple weeks ago that came up, and I could kind of feel my blood pressure. I'm probably about 50 shades of red right now, but just taking deep breaths, taking a walk. Right? And you've often heard this. How many times do you go to maybe possibly respond to someone via email because you're reacting? It's like, no, sleep on it, and then come back the next day, because you may say something that you wish that you could take back, and that's really difficult to do, right?
What I hear there is a lot of practices, ones that are effective for you, to be able to pause and take the space and patiently allow that space to be able to determine what you want this outcome to be and how you want to show up, and then show up in that way. And when you fail, you own it and address it.
Say you're sorry.
Yeah.
Really. As simple. A leader, that is not weakness. Really, that is not weakness to go and say, listen, my bad. I messed up on that. I'm not afraid to do that. And I hope by doing that, Mark, that it gives other people permission than to say, hey, I'm not going to be put in the penalty box, if I mess up, right? And so I think we have to, a leader is leading by example. And I think when we do that kind of thing, it gives other people that know that they've got the grace to mess up. It's okay. We all mess up. We're human beings.
Connect us with that and the innovation and growth that happens inside your organization. People are trying things all the time. They're running experiments. I've seen them. I've witnessed them. You're in tech. It's changing all the time. Talk to me about how do you view mistakes? How do you talk about mistakes? How do you think about failure inside the organization? And how do you prepare people to innovate despite the fact that there's going to be mistakes made?
Well, I will tell you, we've tried many experiments over the years, over the 30 years. Some of them have worked swimmingly well and some of them not so. One thing that I would say, and this is just very practical, time box those experiments. Say, we're going to try this. And I'll give you just a very good example here, a very tangible example. We've opened up other offices that did not go as well.
Yeah.
And what we realize in hindsight, right? Hindsight's always 20/20, but we let that go too long. We should have time boxed that. We're going to say, okay, for 6 months, we're going to try this and see what happens. And then if it does not work out, then we'll evaluate, right? I'm not saying we abandon ship, but let's evaluate it at that point. So that's just a practical thing. And I just know from doing a lot of experiments, it's good to time box those. The other thing that I would say is just, again, we want people to try things. We want people to have the freedom to do that. But when we do mess up, let's do a retrospective. Let's do a debrief. And you probably know Cujo Teschner. You've probably met Cujo in the past. And I'll never forget him saying in the military, it's plan, execute, debrief, right? Plan, execute, debrief. And I think sometimes we may just quickly move on to the next thing without that debrief. So let's just say that we are working with a client and maybe something goes awry with that client. Let's do a retrospective. What could we have done differently? And get in a room and talk about that and call those things out. But yeah, I think that is because obviously when you're experimenting, things are going to sometimes not work out, but you need to do that introspection and that breaking down of what that was so that you don't repeat that same mistake the next time. Here's how we would do it differently next time.
Well, I appreciate that. I think about the habits and rituals that we get into when we just go from execute. Some people forget the planning step and some people forget the debriefing step. And how do we want to make this better next time? How did it go? And I know that in some organizations, if you only do that whenever it's bad, it can slow down the process. And so if you just get into a habit of always debriefing, then it's like, this is normal. We do this all the time.
Plan, execute, debrief. I love it. And I'm ripping that off from Cujo.
It's a good one.
I guess I'm ripping that off from the military.
That's
but yeah,
right.
to your point on the planning too, Mark, I can't stress that piece enough. I had in one of my corporate jobs, because I was in corporate sales for a Fortune 500 company, and then Greg and I both started our careers at McDonnell Douglas. But I remember I had a boss that was an ex-Marine, and his favorite saying was, failing to plan is planning to fail. And he really drilled that into us, like, have your plan. Who is it? Was it Abraham Lincoln that said, was it Abe Lincoln that said, when you're going to cut down a tree, spend twice as much time.
Sharpen the saw for 55 minutes and take 5 minutes to cut it down. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the planning. That's the preparation for this execution it needs to go well. And
for sure.
Definitely.
And I will tell you, sometimes when things have not gone well, it's because we did not take enough time in the beginning to plan.
And you catch that in the debrief. Well, I think about one of the things that I've watched you as you're a public figure. You're a CEO in a private held firm, but you have clients. And so it makes you out in the public world. That's what I think that there's quite a few CEOs out there that are mourning the fact that they don't get to live only internally. They actually they're speaking, they're talking to their employees. And right now with this world, they're out, they're a public speaker now. And so how do you think through that challenge of being both in the public eye as well as, you've got your private life as well? What has allowed you to do that so it looks clean and simple from the outside? I know that it doesn't always work out perfectly, but what has been some secrets for you as you've been able to be public-facing CEO and have private thoughts and acknowledge that those are not always the same?
Wow, I've never been asked that question. That is a really good question. But I think the way that I'm going to answer that is it definitely comes down more to prioritization and knowing I think just like as an organization has to have values, Mark, so does an individual. And you have to know as an individual what your non-negotiables are. And I'm the first to say I've not always done this perfectly, but I'm not going to sacrifice my family for a networking event. I'm going to look, and I've gotten better at this over the years, and we don't have enough time to go into this, but I kind of grew up a little bit I was an only child and very high achiever, kind of grew up a little bit with a little bit of a performance mentality, my identity was kind of tagged to how I performed in school, how I did such and such. I have really had to do the work to get past that. That is not who I am. And who I am is not a CEO. I'm first a child of God. Then I am the wife to Greg. I am the mom to my 3 kids, the yaya to our grandson. Having those priorities are really important as an individual. And they may look differently for you. They may look differently for another leader, right?
What I hear there is do the real work that allows you to understand your own values as a leader, the organizational values that you're leading, where those intersect and where those align. Before we even push record, I asked you if there was anything off limits, and you said, no, it's okay. Anything you want to talk about is okay. And I think about the leadership model that I've seen you lead with is one of transparency, where you get more and more comfortable with the fact that my life is transparent, so you can look behind the curtain. It's okay. It's not perfect, but it's real and authentic. That is what I see when I look at you and what I hear from you out in the public and whenever we're talking privately. I hear one Lisa, and it's really beautiful.
Mark, thank you for that. Because if you were to ask me what I believe are the elements that are necessary, transparency is one of them. Approachability is one of them. Communication is really important, and authenticity is paramount. People need to see you walking what you talk. And I've got a dear friend, I don't know if you know Meredith Knopp, but she's the CEO for the St. Louis Food Bank. Dear friend of mine. And we always talk about this, and she says, the audio has to match the video. Have you ever watched something and it's not in sync? It drives you crazy, right? So I hope really that what my family sees, Lisa at home, and what our colleagues see and our clients see, I'm the same person. I'm not going to push my faith, but I'm also not going to hide it.
Yeah, because you can't, because it's part of your life. And so you're going to share it.
It's part of who I am.
Well, I think about, back to the question of inclusivity. How do we build inclusivity? That whole thing of here is my whole self, and you're going to hear the same thing when we're closed door as you are when we're in front of each other. It's one of the pieces that, for me, the habits that I worked on as a leader over the last 30 years is I want to have the same message behind closed doors as I have outside. That way I don't have to remember what I said about you before and what I said about you in front of you. If those messages align, and what the work has been is just when I'm in closed doors and somebody's name comes up, I pressure test, would I be talking about them in the same way if they were right here beside me? And if I can say resoundingly yes, then I'm okay. And if I have to question that, if I say, well, I would say it differently, then I need to process that and figure out what I would say with them present. And so that is what I see in you. And it was harder for me. You make it look simple. It has been the work that coaches have poured into me. They've allowed me space to say poor things in front of them, so that then whenever I understood how to refine that and come up with habits and behaviors that aligned my internal world and my external world, the video matching the audio. I think about, if you think about spiritual growth, boy, oh boy, wouldn't that be a beautiful definition, aligning the outside and inside of our hearts. And that's what, whenever you're describing inclusivity, that's what you're doing. You're just having values that you're living by, and they get to be felt instead of talked about only. So thank you for that. There's so much that I would love to hear from you and share with you. I do want to just mention AI for a moment. So you're in the tech world.
Yes.
And AI is moving, and I'm just going to set the stage. I believe it's the fastest moving and one of the most powerful forces that we've seen technology-wise. I don't know if that's where you stand or not, but how are you thinking through it in your own life, leadership, and also business?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And we subscribe to that same philosophy. In fact, Mark, I had an emotional intelligence guru on my podcast. I don't know what episode he was, Phil Johnson out of Canada. And he was talking about the need for emotional intelligence in the workplace. And this stat blew my stockings off. He said that more change was going to happen in this century alone than the last 20
centuries.
2,000
years. Yeah.
Yeah, last
say
20
it again.
centuries.
There's going to be more change that happens in this next
century than the former 20 centuries.
Yeah.
Because technology is moving so fast. In fact, Einstein, I don't know what his IQ was, but he was saying AI, the IQ is 1,000.
Yeah, instead of 160, right?
Instead of 160, yes.
Yeah.
And so for people that think, this is just a buzzword, it's going to go away, I don't believe it's going to go away. So here's the first thing that I would say. Open your mind and be willing to embrace it. But obviously, we have to put governance around that. But I don't think AI, and I'll give you an anecdotal on this too, I don't think AI is going to replace the human being, but I do think it's going to hopefully take away some of those menial tasks that a human being would traditionally do so that they can do higher value things. So I have an anecdotal on this. There was almost like a data analysis that we were doing for an organization recently. And the way that we wanted the outcomes to come out, we got some pieces from AI on that, but it could not do the whole thing. And so at the end, a human being actually had to go in and do a portion of that. So I don't think that it's something to be afraid of. Think of it as what are those use cases in your business? What are the low-hanging fruit that you can use AI for to help you maybe do your job a little faster?
Yeah. What are the time-bound experiments that you can run, back to your previous point, that you can test out and see if it can help and support your team, not hurt and hinder? I love that. If you could go back to the day you stepped into 30 years ago, you start in your business, you step into the role and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be? What would you tell that younger version of Lisa?
That's a really great question. I'm going to go back to my faith, and I've been a Jesus follower since I was 13 years old, but let's just say there's been times where I've really tried to lead without including him. And I would go back and say, keep your anchor there. Just focus on being a faithful follower of him, and then everything else will fall into place. And I'm talking about, Mark, from being a business leader to being a spouse to being a parent. It really affects every area of my life, but I've not always done it perfectly. But I've come to the point in my life, I think it's age a lot, and God's had to show me things in multiple lessons over the years, right? But I really truly just try to surrender to him, keep him as my anchor, and just stay focused on that instead of all the other things. So there's so much more we could talk about there, but
well, that's a good one. I mean, I think that, we're all growing as leaders, trying to figure this thing out. What does it look like to do it well? And we do all have multiple roles. You've got quite a few of them that are combined in partnership and in marriage and in business leadership and in parenting. You've got so many there that are so critical. And you would go back and reinforce that your values come from your faith and that your values are solid. Go out and lead with them. That's what I hear in that. And I have so many conversations about values around leadership and exploring what their values are and helping them stand strongly in them and say, these are my values. This is what I stand for. And when there's disconnect between those, the people we lead lose credibility. We lose credibility and trust with them. And so It's really critical that we do the internal work, that you get to the point where you can walk one walk. And so, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing that. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think about Stephen M.R. Covey, leading at the speed of trust, right? And if you have trust in the organization, really and truly, your performance can be multiplied. Yeah. But if there is low trust, it's the best way to have a disengaged culture. And
disengagement costs. It costs the people that are working for us. It costs the businesses. It costs the clients. It costs everybody. The number is $1.9 trillion of lost productivity in the U.S. alone, just because of disengagement. And that disengagement comes from a core lack of trust in where we're headed and how I can go follow. And so, really, really appreciate that. If you are a CEO that would love to build purpose and profit in your life, would love to meet you and just have a conversation. You can find myself or any of our coaching partners at encouragingleaders.com. Thank you for listening. And Lisa, thank you so much for pouring into our group here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mark. It was a lot of fun.